Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the DUBCAST with Dubside. I'm Andrew Lazaga.
And I'm Dubside.
Today, I want to address a question that's been on my mind for the past several years, and I'm sure has been a big question on the mind of anyone who's been interested in Greenland rolling, and that is, what makes a good rolling kayak?
Well, since most people start on the layback rolls, you want a kayak with a low back deck. Okay, if you can lean back and get your head all the way onto the back deck, touching the back of your head to the back deck. Now, when I do that, I always lift my butt out of the seat a little bit, which is perfectly okay. But if you can't get your head anywhere onto the back deck because the back seat is too high or the back deck is too high, that's going to make it hard to do all the advanced layback rolls in. And so the Greenland designs, you can see how the back edge of the coaming is way down on your waistline, kind of, and that makes the layback rolls easier. I find that the width of the kayak, or as they say, the kayak beam, isn't quite as much of a factor. And I learned to do my rolls when I first went to Greenland, as I'll be talking about in this Dubcast. I was using my Feathercraft Kahuna, which has a beam of 25 inches, which is not a narrow kayak. But I will say there is one roll where that does make a fair amount of a difference, and that is the Kanap Atajigut Ipelash logo, which is the one where you hold the paddle under the kayak and scull around that way. The extra width does make that difficult.
Now, I'm sure you've seen a lot of skin-on-frame Greenland kayaks built by Greenlanders. Was there anything that you noticed about the ones that they built for the rolling competition?
Well, I mean, generally they're not as long as the racing kayaks, and they don't need to have a skeg put on. That the racing kayaks they tie a skeg on, or if they're using the same kayak for rolling, they take the skeg off when it's time to roll. I once built a kayak with Maligiaq to do the video that we did together. He built a kayak just to make one that would roll very well, which we used in the filming of it, and that was his focus. And he's got the back deck nice and low and did the other dimensions how he wanted them. And I remember taking that kayak out once, it was with Wayne Herodowicz. We were just out paddling for a day. This is after we'd done the video. And we took it out on the lake, and I was amazed at how awful this kayak was. and it's just a forward, like, you lean it, you lean it to, edge it to one side, it would go the other way. And I was like, what is going on here? And so Maligiaq said, "Oh yeah, that's not a paddling kayak. It's just a rolling kayak."
Oh, okay.
And there's so much interaction between just the slightest little change in dimension. And when you bring the chines, the lower thing up to the front, when that bends up to meet the bow, or if it comes straight across, it has a lot of bearing on how the kayak functions when you lean it a little bit. And since he wasn't intending that to be a performance kayak for paddling forward, he just wanted it to roll very well. He didn't worry about those sort of factors. So, and it looked like a reasonable kayak. If you're not going to the fine eyes of a kayak designer, but I was shocked at just how poorly it performed.
One thing that I've observed for first-time skin-on-frame builders who are building kayaks for rolling is the mistake of making it too narrow.
Yeah.
18 or 17 inches wide or something like that.
Yeah.
The problem with those things are like you roll back up and then you roll over again on the other side, because the thing won't just stay upright, just keeps rolling like a log.
Yeah. So as you're coming out of the roll, you can get your face up out of the water, but that last little bit, the kayak just wants to flop back on its side, and you can't finish the roll. Whereas if you make a really flat, stable one, it's hard to get up to that point. But once you're up that point, the kayak wants to stay flat. It's just to get it to start to go over. Whereas the other ones, they to get the start to come up. The other ones will come up, but then they can't finish it off. These are they can finish it off, but they can't come up. So you have to have a balance in there.
Yeah, you have a highly rockered kayak so that the center of gravity is low. It helps to have the bottom flat, and then you extend the ends up so that they have a little bit more volume in them. I believe that this extra buoyancy can make the kayak naturally want to float on its side, would be easier to recover from. The Sterling Kayak's Illusion is a good example. When that kayak first came out, some people I know who were into Greenland rolling discovered that it was really good for forward finishing rolls. Also, another kayak that features that design is Freya Finwood's Stitch and Glue kayak designed by our father.
Oh, yeah, yeah. That one rolls very well. Yeah, I've been in that one.
It's highly rockered with these upturned ends.
Yeah. Well, you have to have enough volume in the front to get your knees up a little bit higher. If your legs are just flat down, the Maligiaq is clamping your legs down. It impedes your forward flexibility. And you can't get your head all the way down to the front deck, your chest down against the top of the coaming. That'll impede the forward ending rolls quite a bit. The first time I went to Greenland, DUBCAST number 6 talks about, after the competition, they wanted to see me roll a skinner frame kayak. And I think I got in Maligiaq's rolling kayak, and I couldn't do all the hardest rolls. And he got in my feathercraft, and he couldn't do all his hardest rolls. And we were just used to the different timing of the different shapes. So once you get your body tuned into a particular kayak, you get a different one, and it's different, and it throws you off.
I remember when Sterling Donalson made the black ice cap for you.
Yeah.
You mentioned that was a different experience in rolling as well.
Yeah, well, he kept readjusting it for me, even though it's a fiberglass kayak. He would, I guess, take it back to his shop and chop it up. And so he had the first version of it, because he went through a couple trial versions before he had the final one. And I said, no, can you take the back deck down lower? And so he brought it back and said, this is just a half inch lower. I said, no, take it way, way down. I mean, sub-basement level. I mean, take it down lower. And the final one, it was still low, but it still wasn't low enough for. I mean, I don't know if it would have been legal if it was any lower, but it was still that, since that one has a peaked deck, both front and the back. You'd be lying on that peak behind you, and you couldn't get your body all the way down flat to the deck as well.
Oh, okay, yeah. I've always wondered whether these kayaks are good for anything else. Not good for surfing, for instance.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a typical way to address that is, you have multiple kayaks, and you have your play rolling kayak, and then you have your surf kayak and your expedition kayak, multiple purpose things. In Greenland, kayaks from different areas develop differently because you have different conditions, different situations. So it was all built for purpose it was going to be used for. And so that would carry over today. You got a rolling kayak is going to be different from a racing kayak and different from a surfing kayak.
That's why you have to have more than one.
Yeah.
All right. So shall we get on to the next DUBCAST?
Yes, let's do it.
Welcome to the DUBCAST with Dubside. This is DUBCAST number 7. I'll tell you about going to Greenland, to the Greenland competition for the first time. That was in 2004. And some initial details about the rules for the competition. I'll tell you about Cheri Perry, who went to the competition that year 2004 for the first time. And we'll get into some of the details of the rolling and ropes competition, including the Straightjacket Roll, the hardest roll on the list, and some of the different rope gymnastics. They call it Straightjacket in the Greenlandic language. And we will have another piece of Greenlandic music. In the rolling competition, they have a list of 35. Back in 2004, it was 30 different rolls. Now it is 35 different rolls. And they each have a point value ranging from either 2 points up to the hardest one is 11 points. You do them on both sides if you can. Do as many as you can, whatever you're capable of. These rolls all have Greenlandic names. And the hardest roll on the list is known as Dashlit Bashlatisluit Chimanamik. And that translates to Dashlit, that it would be arms, Bashlatisluit, crossing them, Chimanamik is using only the body. So in English, we've just titled that the Straightjacket Roll. So you have no hands, not even an elbow. Your arms are completely close to your body, and you just have your torso and your head to swing that around somehow and make the kayak come back upright. It is a very, very difficult roll, and often not often seen successfully done in competition. The judging standards are pretty tight on that roll. You have to have your fingers held into your armpits throughout the roll, and you cannot lift your elbows or your arms away from your body. They have to stay right against your chest the whole time. And you cannot slide your fingers out of your armpits to pull your elbows farther down to your side. They're pretty particular about that. So it is a very difficult roll to do. And I'll tell you, the rope gymnastics, that involves hanging on or under or inside of or over some horizontally suspended ropes and doing various maneuvers where you swing all the way around and come back to where you started from. This is of course done on land, and there are 70 some different of these maneuvers, and they all have different variations like left and right or backwards and forwards, or most of them have all four of those: left forward, left backward, right backward. So if you were to do all these, that's some over 200 times you're going around the ropes. You have half an hour to do that. Makes for a very demanding set of exercises. And the hardest one, the hardest series of ones, there's 4 or 5 of them, they're called atonago. And atonago means not touching. So the beginning moves, there's 2 different variations of the ropes. There's the high ropes, where the rope is strung across the uprights tight, sort of above head level. And the low ropes, where it's down, hanging down, sagging down to about roughly waist or chest level. So the high ropes are a bit harder. And on the high ropes, the hardest one, atonago, you have a rope in each hand, like reaching up like you're going to do a chin-up. And you swing up and over, and that's done forward, head first or feet first. That's the initial beginning ones. The hardest ones are that same thing, but that rope is not supposed to touch any part of your body other than the hands that you're holding the rope with. So atonago, not touching. And those are extremely difficult. It requires the exact perfection of strength, coordination, balance, and timing. Everything's got to be just right. So those are very, very difficult maneuvers to accomplish. They have set up the competition in many different age categories. I think when they started back in 1987, they just made it like everybody under 14 and everybody 14 and up. But as more and more people participated, it wasn't fair to have 15-year-old competing against a guy who's in his prime in the age of 29 or something. So nowadays it's set up where there's a 4 to 6-year-old kids, and then 7 to 9 and 10 to 12, and it goes on up in divisions for every bracket of say 3 or 4 years. And the main category is a 20 to 34-year-old group. Then there's a 35 to 49 and a 50 and up. And of each of those groups, it's divided also into male and female. So you have the men competing separate from the women, the boys competing separate from the girls. And they also, when they opened it up to foreigners in the year 2000, they made a separate international division. And according to the rules, it says that's for if you have a fiberglass, plastic, or a folding kayak, that competes separately from the skin-on-frame kayaks. In each of these different divisions, you have awarded first, second, and third place, which is gold, bronze, and silver medals. So in practical terms, that works out to it's kind of difficult to go to the competition and not win a medal in something. There's so many different divisions and categories that it's you're not competing against the whole big field. You're just competing against the people in your group. So the overall winner of the competition, they have a way of weighting the scores to combine them all together. And that person with the highest score overall is deemed the Kayak Man of the Year and the Kayak Woman of the Year. But that title, which in Greenlandic the word is Kaituslamak, which translates to the very skilled, the extremely talented kayaker, that title is only given to the winner of the 20 to 34-year-old age group and only in the Greenlandic class. But there is a provision in the rule, if you are younger or older than that, you can ahead of time notify the organizers that you would like to compete in that age category, and then you can go for the title if you're good enough to get the highest score. Well, let me describe Cheri Perry. She comes from the New England area. It's either Connecticut or Rhode Island somewhere. And she took to kayaking and rolling and got fanatical about it like I did. And Cheri is, she's roughly my age, maybe a little bit younger. She is very limber and flexible, made her very good at rolling. She does yoga, which also helps quite a bit. And Cheri is a very determined and assertive person, not nearly as laid back and nonchalant as I am sometimes. As I described earlier, the racing was never quite my thing, since I was always too overdressed to exert myself on the water. So I trained a little bit for the Greenland races, but I didn't expect I was going to be outstanding in those. Cheri, however, did train for the racing. She trained for everything. She was all in for this competition. And she decided she would compete in the Greenlandic class 20 to 34-year-old. She was older than that, but she was going to notify them to go for the women's title, the women's Kaituslamak title. I've got plenty of stories about Greenland in 2004 and years after that, so we'll just skim the surface for right now. Well, Cheri had practiced and trained so hard. She had a special skin-on-frame kayak made to her dimensions that would race very well and also would roll very well, and she had actually got the Straightjacket Roll to work. She was doing successfully, so she was looking to really do well in the rolling competition. I was training for the rolling as well as the ropes, and I was not able to do the Atonagu move because we didn't even know that move existed. We did not have all the information about the ropes like we did with the rolling. So I was sort of going somewhat by guesswork. And for both rolling and ropes, there's a rule that says to qualify, to get any medal, even if there's only 3 people in your category, you must get a minimum qualifying score, which at the time was 30 points. Now, 30 points in rolling, the basic roll is 2 points, and after that, the 3 points. So, a handful of rolls, you do 5 or 6 rolls, you can pretty much be assured that you're going to get the 30 points. In the ropes, I didn't have all the point information, so I was practicing somewhat in the blind, but I was pretty sure I could hit the qualifying score. Nobody before that time, the few foreigners had tried the ropes, who had been attempted the ropes in competition, had not successfully gotten the 35 qualifying score, so I was hoping I could at least get that far and set that precedent. Well, both of us got there a week early, figuring we'd need the time to acclimate. And Cheri there was a little bit of drama with Cheri getting her skin-on-frame kayak there. It wouldn't fit. It would not physically fit on the plane. So they had to put it on a ship, and she got it just in time for the competition. It took like an extra week to get it there, but since she'd gotten there a week early, it worked out, but I'm sure she was quite nervous about that. I was just taking my feathercraft, so since the folding kayak taken on the plane proved to be a simple matter. Seeing Greenland for the first time in person is quite an amazing thing. I had to get used to the fact that there are no trees there, And we were out of the lake near where the house we were at. And you could paddle out there to practice. And I could see the bottom of the lake. And I could take my paddle and reach with the end of the paddle all the way down as far as I could and still not touch the bottom. That is how clear the water was. Nice to see that somebody there had been taking care of my friend, the water. We're walking around town in the weeks before the competition started and just getting the feel for the place. And there's not everybody speaks English. Most people don't speak English. The Greenlanders, they speak Greenlandic and they speak Danish. So when you find somebody who can speak English, it's nice to be able to talk to them. And this guy, I meet him on the street. It's a guy named Oli, and Oli could speak some English. And about the first thing he says to me was, "I've never tried kayaking. Is it difficult?" And that really threw me for a loop. I'm thinking, how you've never tried kayaking? What's up with that? You know, I had the impression that every Greenlander could knock out the Straightjacket Roll left and right, no problem. But that is actually, it's kind of like imagining that every American can ride a horse and rope cattle and do all the things that cowboys did. Cowboys, the legacy of the West is a big part of the American heritage, but that doesn't mean that every American can ride a horse. Well, same thing with Greenlanders. They all are aware of kayaks and are very proud of their heritage, but not that many of them are all that anxious to do it themselves. They're just happy someone else is. We were also surprised to find out that some of the local people did not know that the kayak event was scheduled to take place, which I guess is like expecting every American to know when the next rodeo was scheduled. However, when the other kayak teams arrived, the day the competition started or the day before, and you have several different towns in Greenland, and they all send a contingent of people to compete. And then that was like being at the rodeo. Then everybody's there, and they're all fanatical about kayaking. And then you feel like you're at some sort of, not quite the Olympics, but something where everybody's on the same page. On the first day, they did the short distance race, which is between 3 to 6 kilometers. And they adjust the distances so the kids run shorter distances. And then for the men, they'll run the 35 to 49 and the over 50 and maybe the 18 to 19 teens all together as one race, and then they just score it differently. So you're racing next to some people that aren't exactly in your category, and the 20 to 34 group is usually a longer distance than that. So in my division, the guys, the Greenlanders, most of them just took off like bullets in front of me, and I was left back with the slower folks to straggle through that. But Cheri raced in the 20 to 34-year-old group. And when they finished, they were announcing the results. And they said, the winner of the international first place was Cheri Perry. And it went on. And then she had to say, excuse me, I'm in the Greenlandic division. I want to compete for the title. So I've notified that I have a skin-on-frame kayak. That's what I'm supposed to be. And they started saying, these excuses started to arrive. They said, well, your kayak has nylon deck lines. It has to have sealskin deck lines to be in the Greenlandic category. And Cheri, in that very assertive manner of hers, went to borrow a different kayak for the next race. Even though she had gone to all the trouble of having a special kayak made for her, she was intent on being in the Greenlandic class. So she borrowed one of the Greenlanders' kayaks with the sealskin deck lines, and they were still saying that she was in the international class. On paper, at least, the rules seem to indicate that it's the equipment, not the person, that determines whether it's international or Greenlandic class. But Cheri is a very perceptive person, very aware of social and cultural differences. And she figured out that what they were trying to say to her in a nice way is, you cannot compete in the Greenlandic class. It's not like Greenlanders just look you in the eye and say, no, you can't do that. They're more polite about it. And if you are aware and not a pushy, obnoxious person, you pick up on that, and then you realize, okay, that's what's going on here. So Cheri very graciously contented herself with being in the international class. Competition takes about a week to do. They usually run one event a day. And the day of the rope competition, takes quite a bit of time because even kids as young as 4 to 6 year olds can do the ropes. Not kids that young generally haven't tried to roll yet, so the rolling doesn't go nearly as long. But the rope competition, since everybody gets half an hour to do their routine, and it's even some people that don't have much of a routine, they just take time to do it, rest in between, so they can still take the full 30 minutes. So they run all day long. There may be 2 or maybe 3 different stations, judging stations. And I was very intent on learning all I could about the ropes because we didn't have all the information. We didn't know exactly how all the moves were done. So I got there early in the day and just started watching the kids. Just sat down next to the event and was making little notes, had a little notepad, pencil and paper out and writing things down and just watching for hours as this thing went on. And towards the end of the day, it was time for the foreigners to compete. And I got on and started doing all the things that I'd learned how to do and some things I'd sort of picked up from watching. And I did fairly well. And towards the end, there was a guy there, a guy from Spain who had been to the competition a number of times, another foreigner. And he came over to me when I finished. He said, Dubside, they're saying, kivitok. And I said, what the heck does that mean? I had no idea. And he said, no, kivitok, kivitok is a person who lives outside the town and has special powers. Kivitoks can fly and run as fast as caribou. And so they're saying you must have these special powers. And I said, oh, well, guess that sounds cool. I found out later more about this Kivitok character. It comes up in Greenland folktales quite a bit. And there's a bit more to it than that, but they do have extraordinary powers. And I figured out later that it looked like some foreigner came with no knowledge of ropes and sat down and watched it all day and then just got on and did it and did quite well. Actually, my score was about 330 something. And the top score that day, somebody set a new record in ropes. It was 526. I wasn't up at that level, but I did quite well, and certainly more than the 30-point minimum. And so it seeming that somebody just looked at this thing and did it all, which was amazing because it takes time to work out the little details of these different moves, but it looked like quite a feat. So somebody must have just said, oh, he must be a Kivitok. He must have superpowers that he can do that so well. So they called me Kivitok. Well, that year there were maybe a dozen foreigners or so. There was some people from Spain, some Danish people there, a guy from Canada, I think. And so the Americans, we had maybe 5 or 6 Americans there. And you don't have to compete in everything. You don't have to compete in anything. You can just come as part of the entourage of a group and still participate in the ceremonies and dinners and things without competing. But most of us were competing somewhat. And they were generally having the foreigners go last for the different events, although you can never be sure of anything in Greenland. You have to sort of wait and see what happens. And they would usually just tell us to be ready and then go when it was time to go. And so for rolling, you don't know if you want to get suited up and wait too long and then get cold. If you get in your kayak on the water, you could be there for hours. Or if you go eat some food, then they tell you to go, then your stomach is full. So it's all sorts of apprehension and nervousness and trying to do your best in the competition, but that's part of the deal. There don't seem to be a whole lot of women rolling, and there are very few kids. Nobody pre-teen rolling. Maybe 1 or 2 teenagers that year were actually trying it. But the men rolling, the top men in the 20 to 34-year-old group, there were some very, very strong rollers there, and I think the highest score was 270 something. And below that, 260 something. The high 200s were the winning scores there. But none of them were able to successfully pull off the Straightjacket Roll. That, as the norm, very hard to see that one ever accomplished successfully in competition. And some of the top competitors don't even bother trying that because it's not worth giving it a shot, and their time is running out anyway. In the Greenlandic class, the rules specify that the rolling must be done with a sealskin duilik. You can't use neoprene. And the sealskin ones don't give you nearly as much warmth as the neoprene. And they're also a little bit stiff and awkward sometimes, so you have to sort of slide the slack to the right place before you do the roll so it doesn't catch and hinder your movement. Unlike in the rope competition, in rolling, if you miss a roll on the first try, you can take one more shot at it. And if you make it on the second try, they'll take a point off. So if, say, you did the straightjacket roll on the second try, that would be 10 points instead of 11 points. And if you miss the second one, that's it. You have to go on to the next move. For each rolling competitor, it would be very nice if they could just tell you when you are going to roll. But they don't work that way, not in Greenland. It's more like they just say, well, just be ready. And keeps you on pins and needles for hours on end, waiting to determine if it's your turn to compete or not. They had the foreigners waiting most of the day, and then finally at the very end, all the Greenlanders got their half hour of competition in. They were doing the rolling, and then they said to the foreigners, okay, now it's your turn. So they started on those, half an hour each, and it came to the very last person rolling. And the straightjacket roll is just about the last thing on the list. So this is the final thing of that day, final person in the water. And they set up for the straightjacket roll, hands under the, fingers in the armpits, shoulders tight to the side. On the right side, went under, came right up, did it. Amazing. Set up the left side, came up, went under, came up, first try, second side. Boom, boom, just like that. It was quite amazing to see. The crowd was in awe. I think, however, the Greenland competitors were probably noting that this was being done not in a skin-on-frame kayak and not with a sealskin tuilik, which I guess from their perspective puts an asterisk next to that achievement. It was legitimate straightjacket roll done both left and right side, but not quite as hard as it is in the Greenlandic class. At the end of the week of competition, they have a big dinner. They give out all the rest of the medals. They crown the Kaituslamuk, Man and Woman of the Year, give out trophies, and it's quite a celebration. If it's any indication of the impact that going to Greenland had on me, I can tell you that I've been back since then about a dozen times. Going back multiple times gives you a sense of how things operate, although you can't be sure what to expect every time, but you have a general idea. And of course, when somebody says, Uanga Naminek, you know it's time to sing the kayak song. Well, I've got a different song today, and this is a guy named Rikka. That's R-I-K-K-A. And Rikka is a younger generation, more contemporary artist in Greenland. This song is called Gymnastics, which translates to be happy, smile. Gymnastics.
Inarasit nuina leka Kisavana malogivara Neriumek junior nervata Pishtuanek junior ratela tamanut Qimagit ilumu Qongoyuhi Zashunga Kinarit ilumu Qongoyuhi Sashtunga Inuga Sakina rasid nuwengina leqaq Kisalanani isashugu Qongoyushtuni kina nerata Kisalanek dunya ratelaqa tamanut Qimagit ilumut Qongoyuhi Sashtunga kinarit ilumut pangayohi sa sunga inugan. Imagit ilumut pangayohi sa sunga kinarit ilumut pangayohi sa sunga inuga sa kinaraswid noren ginalakak kisalanani isastuhugo pangayoshidoni kinanarata Kisalanek dunyara tilaka tamanut Qimagit ilumut Qongoyohi sasunga Qinarit ilumut Qongoyohi sasunga inugan. Imagit ilumut Qongoyohi sasunga Kinarit ilumut Qongoyohi sasunga inugan.
And can you tell that's a happy song? Well, Rikka is still making records, unlike some of the older musicians I've presented in the past. And Rikka could use all the support he can get. So I need you to go to atlanticmusic.gl and look for Rikka, R-I-K-K-A, and this is his second CD. It's called Rikka 25. It contains a whole album's worth of fine music, and all the lyrics are written in Greenlandic and translated into English, so you can find the full meaning of every line in that song. Cover of his CD has his face on the side with a blue sky with white clouds. All right. Coming up in episode number 8, I will tell you about a person whose name comes up sooner or later every time the conversation is Greenland kayaking, and that would be Maligiaq Padilla, whose name I have mentioned a few times already, but we'll get a full introduction to him in episode number 8. Until then, takus.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Don't forget to leave a comment, share, or give us a like if you enjoyed this podcast. You can also email us to let us know what you think at dubcastwithdubside@gmail.com. Consider helping support the Dubcast with Dubside through Patreon. You can also donate directly using PayPal to our email address, dubcastwithdubside@gmail.com.